Not safe for work. Crime scene cleanup crew members of Reddit. What is your most disturbing story? I'm not a professional cleaner. But I have cleaned a murder scene before, unfortunately. My best friend was to beat to death with a baseball bat in his home. It's apparently pretty expensive to have these people come out and clean, and his parents didn't have it. Trying to do what we could to help out. A few of his friends got together to clean it. I don't have anything crazier to say that I haven't already about the scene. The entire experience was extremely surreal and not something I think about often. I'd say the craziest thing would have to be the weird places we'd find a speck of blood with seemingly no logical way for it to have gotten there. Logic. Of course. Had left that room before we got there. I'm not a crime scene cleanup crew. But I did have to clean up my father's brains and blood from the room he killed himself in. The people basically just didn't do a thorough job. There were red streaks down the hallway walls from the blood-soaked bed being taken out. And it's like they didn't have a ladder because the walls of the room were clean until nearly the roof, then you could see splatters. I found a piece of rotted, I'm pretty sure, brain stuck to the top of the curtain rails. There was also a smell we believe was from the blood soaking into the wooden floors. So we had to have those floors replaced. Police detective here. In a rural area, a guy had passed away in his yard. In July. It was 8 days before someone found him. He was partially liquefied. There were flies everywhere and the stench was quite nasty. The knowing where this fly were before they landed on your face did not help. Had to shovel him in the bag with gas masks. For your information, liquid people are quite toxic. My dad used to clean up crime and trauma scenes about 10 years ago and said he had to clean up a suicide one time where he found bits of brain on top of a ceiling fan. He thought that was the worst of it until they moved a TV stand and found a nose behind it. A friend of mine is a cop. He just told me of a guy they found dead in his kitchen. The stove and heater were on and he was naked. They assumed he was just cooking while naked. You know how we all do from time to time. He was dead for at least 3 days. When they lifted him up to turn him around, his penis had sort of melted to the kitchen floor. As they pulled him upwards, the dangling participle stretched off the floor like a rubber band and released, slingshotting back to the body. It sounded absolutely disgusting as he described it. TLDR, melted penis stretched and slingshotted off kitchen floor. Hey. Search and rescue personnel here. Working in Las Vegas, we see a ton of really messed up stuff. Chances are pretty high that if we're looking for a missing person, we'll find an unrelated subject. Worst one was when we were deployed to find a female stuffed in a suitcase. After recovering the female in the suitcase, the coroner said it was the wrong female in a suitcase and we were sent back out to find the right one. I guess I should clarify. Though we aren't a cleanup crew, we are often tasked with body recovery. The coroner's office does the packaging and LA does the investigation. We then solemnly carry them out. Everyone needs to come home eventually. There's someone out there who cares for them. Does doing one on accident count? I used to do auto detailing in college for a car dealership. I was scrubbing the floor of a car and no matter what I did, the water kept having a red tint to it. So I pulled the seats and found about an inch of dried crusted blood and what I can only guess was brain matter skull fragments. Turns out it was a suicide car that the dealership bought at auction. It had been detailed before being sold but they never pulled the seats. We called the cops to confirm it was all logged and shipped the car back to auction. The dealership lost their ass on it but wanted it as far away from their lot as possible. I was a tow truck driver and the worst are motorcycle accidents usually. I've seen some really messed up car accidents, but I've seen motorcycle accidents where the driver was spread out several dozen yards across pavement. My aunt died a few months ago in mid to late October. She wasn't found until Veterans Day on November 11th. She was using the bathroom when he believed she likely had a heart attack from effort. To which she tried running to the back door to get help. Along the way, relieving herself on the floor, she fell short about 15 feet from the door and dragged herself another 10. She lied there for 18-ish days before a neighbor called for a wellness check. My dad, who is a cop, and I got up there before they finished cleaning up everything. At this point she had decomposed just enough to become a part of the carpet. However, the scaring part was not the body in late stage decomposition, not my dad's or my first time, but the remnants of her face which we could not scrub from the carpet. I had read from a previous post that a medical team witnessed a person wrapped in cloth with an electrode in his butt and the other electrode connected to a generator battery. The person was chaired inside and his butt had melted and there was shit oozing out. I feel nauseous while typing this. The person was having some kind of kink play, but I guess the partner wanted him dead. Police officer here. Attended a scene where a guy went to his ex's house, walked in, and murdered her as well as her mother and teenage son. It was clear from the scene that he had gone in with a rifle and shot the three, but that the son had attempted to crawl to a phone in the kitchen. He then went out to his car and grabbed his shotgun and pumped a slug through each of their heads before putting one inside his own head. The son was in high school and was well on his way to college football. His girlfriend was scheduled to also be at the house but had last-minute issues with a family illness. See you all on a text-to-speech YouTube channel in a month. In Florida, bodies decompose real quick. We're talking a good stench within 48-72 hours. What no one's mentioned, I don't think, is that when you walk away from that smell, it doesn't matter because it's all you can smell for days. The smell gives me anxiety, so I end up wearing so much goddamn perfume just so I can try to smell anything else, and I always end up apologizing to my co-workers and or Aristes for the remainder of the shift. I don't clean them for a living but had to clean a few apartments when my uncle managed an apartment complex. We had one tenant OD on heroin. He sat there for roughly 3 weeks before anyone noticed the smell. They took his body and left it to us to clean up. The dude vomited on the ceiling. There were little dry droplets of vomit all over the ceiling right above where he died, and to top it off he basically liquefied and left a puddle of gut juices on the concrete foundation underneath the carpet. I thought that shit was left to a professional team. But I guess it's optional, and if you don't want to pay for it, you can scoop the brains and blood up yourself. Not a cleaner, but when mum died of a brain aneurysm she was dead on the sofa for about 5 hours in front of the fire. I was the one who found her. The only way to describe that smell was cooking pork. I now cannot eat pork or cook pork for that reason, as that smell will stay with me forever. RI bleach if you need it. So my mom used to do cleanup for a certain teal and yellow cleaning company and was the only one certified to do hazmat. They did cleaning for the county sheriff's department, and the one that stuck with her was in the back of a cruiser. They had a meth head as they described him, but he was so tweaked out of his mind he kept rubbing his face back and forth across the dividing glass and managed to wear his face off from ear to ear. I got to see the pictures of it before cleanup. Nearly 10 years ago, and it still haunts me to this day. Why am I reading this thread? User team op. Propane nat gas explosion. Guy's arm was holding onto a ladder going up a holding tank. No body. No anything. Just an arm. Preemptive edit. It was his left arm. You can tell a lot about victims from the crime scene. At first, when we found the torso in the yard, we didn't know he had dandruff. But then we found his head and shoulders in the pool. Funny paramedic story time. So a woman calls 999. Says she thinks her father is dead. Call handler advises CPR, but caller states it is too late. Crew arrives and paramedic approaches remote house. Speaks to daughter, who is upset but advises she thinks it's too late. Paramedic enters property and finds what is effectively a skeleton in the kitchen laid on the floor. History is daughter is fairly estranged and lives overseas from her father. Normally send Christmas cards and no other communication really. After 2 years of no cards, and him not answering the phone, she flies home and finds him dead in his home. I got this tale third hand on a Bad Jobs Stories night shift chat. So cannot confirm if all details are 100% reliable. But it makes for a nice tale. Not eligible to reply as I am not in that profession. But I'd just like to vote for those super obese people who get fused to their couches. I saw a whole documentary on it. The moisture and heat literally causes their flesh and the molecules of the couch to intermingle to the point where the couch is a part of this person's body. And ripping them away will kill them. Kind of like a turtle shell. Super horrific. But fascinating. My best friend used to have this job. Most of the bizarre stuff was cleaning up suicides. Found a guy's full intact mustache across the room when he blew his head off with a shotgun. One guy tried to kill himself by shooting his stomach with a small caliber pistol. He didn't die immediately, so he wrote tons of whacked out stuff on the walls with his blood. Then finished the job. This was relayed to me by a friend of mine who's a Riverside County sheriff. He did a welfare check on an elderly woman who had passed away in her sleep. Under an electric blanket. About 10 days before they found her. Her skin peeled off with the blanket. Not a cleanup crew but attend the scenes. An old gentleman had died in the bath. The top half of his body was all swollen and puffy. Whereas his legs and lower torso and almost melted away. Essentially created a horrendous soup casserole mix in the bath. The coroners had to sift through the bath to find his liver, which had come out. During the post-mortem autopsy, his testicles were so swollen they had to prick them just to drain out all the liquid. I just hate the smell. It seems to stick on your clothes. You come back into the office and everyone can smell it on you. I heard a story of a guy who cleans up bodies from people jumping in front of trains. In this one case they found a body with no head and couldn't for the life of them find the rest of it. In the autopsy room they saw a tuft of hair coming out of where the head should be and realized he hit the train head on and his head had caved into his chest through his neck. My grandfather used to accompany his neighbor, Brian, on pickups, undertaker in the 70s, so less regulation. Brian was grateful because he was only one person on call on the weekend. So when you got a railway job, him and my granddad used to have to walk half a mile picking up body parts in a bucket, and it sped the process up. The worst call he could ever have was a small child. He said he could cope with bodies of older people rotting away. But when it came to a small child, he used to think it was a waste of a life. And that child had a right to grow up. It used to play on him for a few days. Okay. Not my story. But my former boss's. His wife is a mortician. And he does death scene cleanup on the side as a service of the funeral home. He said the worst thing he ever did was clean up after a homeless man snuck into an industrial building. Climbed up to the top of a set of seldom used stairs and passed away. These stairs and the landings were just made up of metal grating. Maybe 2 weeks later, somebody notices the rancid smell. Opens the door to the stairwell. And finds the remains of the man that had liquefied. And dripped down 4 stories of stairs. Found a guy dead in his apartment. Had been there for weeks. We had to process the scene, including rolling him over to take pics. Unfortunately, he was literally a dark green glove and was starting liquefy into the carpet and walls. Rolling him over was like grabbing a 320-pound ball of goo. 2 gloves on each hand and still could feel everything. Also, if you die with your dogs in the room and enough time passes, they will literally eat exposed skin, which is normally your face. So bad. My dad's friend is a cop who works a rural area and loves to tell my dad about the fucked up stuff he's come across. One of them being the time he was sent to a call of a large group of people crying and coughing in an apartment. He gets there and it's a large group of family members there cleaning up the shotgun suicide of a relative. That's when I learned that it's sometimes up to the family of the departed to clean up after the death, and it's not always people in hazmat suits. Had to remove a guy from a house that had died 4 days earlier. Guy was fairly obese and looked like Captain Kangaroo. It took 4 of us to pick the guy and place him in the body bag. I had his right arm. When I lifted the outermost layer of skin with the hair sloughed down to his wrist so it looked like he was wearing a hair bracelet. My partner on his left leg had the leg pop with all the fluid that had pooled in his lower extremities. Good times. Will never forget the smell upon arrival. Errol Morris first-person interview with Joan Doherty. A professional crime scene cleaner. https://www. YouTube. Watch. V equals T7R1 tel 9 hic. Not a cleanup crew but one of my profs, forensic entomologist, told us numerous stories on the cases she worked on. Not sure if this counts but definitely one that sticks out the most. Prof was driving from the campus and was stopped by a swarm of cops, on her way down from the university looking for an assailant who was stabbing people, as there was a student that was found with multiple stab wounds. Turns out it was a student that didn't want to take an exam, so he stuck a knife and attached it to a tree and repeatedly backed himself in it, so he had multiple stab wounds all over his torso. Student survived BTW. Have a friend whose dad used it work for National Rail. His job was to do the cleanup when someone jumped onto the tracks so the public wouldn't find the bits and pieces. Apparently they would find stuff like a good 100 ids or so from the track. Firefighter. Here. A woman's head clamped on a man's junk. Yes. Just the head. My dad used to attend suicides on the railway. People hit by trains at high speed. He said there would be bits everywhere. He shoveled them into bin bags. Usually took 3 bags. He said that birds would fly down and pick bits of flesh up and fly off with them to eat. I remember us once in a restaurant. My dad said I had this bloke's head on a shovel table next to us, asking if he could keep it down please. Interning with a forensics unit. First real crime scene. Guy found out his boyfriend was cheating on him and flew into a jealous rage. Stabbed the guy to death with the handle of a frying pan. Chased him through the house and finished him off in the bathtub, where he stabbed him an estimated 200 additional times. His head was a ruin of pulp and bone shards. The guy I was working with tasked me with digging bits of skull from the drain with tweezers. Obligatory, this wasn't me. Trigger warning. Cruelty to animals. Worst I've ever heard of was the cleanup from an Airbnb that was misused. Apparently it looked like an ordinary orgy at first. God-awful smells. Disgusting stains. etc. The sort of thing that ruins your week but doesn't leave permanent scars. Exclamation point, until the cleaners realized there was a smell that couldn't be explained as sex smells. The smell of rotting animals. The sick fucks had stuck 2 mattresses together after putting a cat between them. Then they had the orgy on top of this bed, with everyone involved contributing to crushing the cat to death. Not my experience, but a friend of the family who was a first responder. A teenage couple, boy and girl, were driving upwards of 100 miles per hour down a country road in Wisconsin at night. The male was driving and was wearing a seatbelt. The female was the passenger and was not wearing a seatbelt. The driver lost control and slammed into a tree. Our friend arrived first on the scene and found the teenage female had been thrown through the windshield and was in many pieces in the branches of the tree. The teenage male driver, who was seat-belted in, was found nearly completely decapitated from his head to his body, with only a strip of neck flesh keeping his head attached. He had been driving so fast that the impact caused his seatbelt across his chest to nearly slice his head from his body. I guess the scariest part is the crime scene cleanup crew in the States at least is an external company you have to pay for. If not, you get to clean it. Source: my parents lived at the end of a long country road. Let's just say the oak tree at the front of their driveway had a record of 7 wins 0 losses. This was quite a bit ago. County decided to put a blinking light that's activated on motion. Doesn't do much good going 120 miles per hour at it. Pretty sure its kill count is in the teens now. Somewhat related. My first apartment. Straight out of high school. It was a studio. But a severe water leak from above prompted management to give me the showroom unit. This was a 1-bedroom upgrade for studio price. Score. It wasn't until I had already lived there for 4 years and moved out that an ex-neighbor I knew told me about how that unit, prior to being a showroom unit, had someone die in there. Body left unattended for 3 weeks. They had to get hazmats and whatnot to clear it out. He asks, didn't management tell you before giving you that unit? No. For what it's worth, had some good times at that pad. Had a friend who did that, and one time he found a baby in a microwave. Yes, a baby in a microwave. My dad had to clean up a place. A murder-suicide. The dude spread his blood all over the place and had a projector screening a false movie cover of him and his wife called The Betrayal, if I recall correctly. The podcast The Cleaning of John Doe is very interesting. It's about a couple who cleans up crime scenes. Be careful though BC, it's obviously disturbing material. What guy should watch crime scene cleaners on YouTube? It's pretty interesting. https://www.youtube.com channel UCV6YCRTS6JXAFs5DFSFIG. My mom doesn't talk about it much, but she went to the store with my sister who was 11 months old at the time, and my dad killed himself by swallowing his entire bottle of antidepressant pills. A lot got caught in his throat, so instead of just ODing he ended up choking on pills and then dying choking on his vomit in their bed. I was born 2 months later. My mom said she wanted to break down but had us 2 kids to live for, so she just kept carrying on and cried during the nights for a long time. Lurks interesting. I don't work in Leo or crime scene cleanups in any way. But I got the chance to do an internship series of ride-alongs with a forensic detective in college. Granted, I only have like 3 months of really part-time experience. I was with a gal that got a call to a public restroom at a park at 3 a.m. Someone had their stomach cut open inside one. Their intestines were pulled out and subsequently used to strangle the injured victim. After death, the victim was stabbed with a Phillips screwdriver 197 times throughout her body. And then he had sex with her corpse before killing himself. I work for police. Not on streets but on dispatch, so I have to note down what's said. Worst job? Teen murder. The girl had 70 plus stab wounds and not a single one by itself was fatal. Death by 1,000 cuts essentially. Then the stories you hear. Rolling over a dead body and black stuff being ejaculated from a penis or putrefied organs being vomited up all over my husband's face. That did make me laugh. Sadly, you do get the gallows humor or else you'd just implode. And these mornings when my husband comes home smelling of dead. Get in the shower, boy. I think that reading this cured my depression and I'm not that suicidal anymore. Thank you. A story about my friend's workmate. He used to work in the civil defense force and was called up to a domestic abuse scene, where the girl was killed. At the scene, he asks his superior where the girl's hair was. His superior simply replied, "Her hair is downstairs. You can go and find it." The man had ripped out the hair with the scalp off the girl's head. My dad's friend used to work as ambulance medic and came across a motorcycle accident. The biker said he felt fine apart from his stomach hurt where he hit the handlebar. Well, he undone his leather jacket and to their disbelief, as soon as he opened the jacket, out fell his intestines. Yes, he died. This is a third-hand account but basically goes like this. Forensic cleaner is cleaning up a murder kitchen in a big house. The police return to the property midway through the cleanup. They silently somehow alert her to the fact that the suspect is still on the property. Then make a show of leaving again but don't really. The cleaner calmly finishes off and leaves. The police find the guy in the air duct with the murder weapon. He had been watching the cleaner the whole time. I need to stop reading this. It's all fucked up.